Okay, thanks, Ray. Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today in our session that looks at embracing the future. And today I'm going to share some of my thoughts and experiences on how you can start to develop your own social media brand. So I suppose the first port of call and the first question you might ask is, why would you even want to develop a social media brand? And there are really many benefits that can come from spending time and effort developing a social media profile. You can make connections. You can also learn lots of new things. There is lots of information that I see on Twitter that possibly wouldn't come across my desk any other way. So it's really a great source of new information. It can be a great way of finding opportunities, and also it's often a way that opportunities find you. So when you're out there and people can see what you're doing, quite often they'll seek you out. And one of the other great benefits is you can actually have a lot of fun. Building a social media brand, spending time on social media can be a really, really enjoyable activity. So when you're thinking about how you should get started, while there are plenty of social media platforms available, unless you've got some really specific goals that suit one of the other platforms, the three really to focus on first are Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So for those of you getting started, you'll be really pleased to hear that some of the basics are common to many platforms. You need to set up a suitable profile. And if your goal is to build your profile as a professional researcher, you do need a professional looking profile. The tone should really say what you are and what you're doing. It needs to promote you and your story, and most importantly, show you in your best possible light. You should have a photo on your profile, and it should be a work-appropriate photo. People don't really want to see you on your holidays in a swimsuit, nursing the cat. You really need to think about what's the image that you want to be projecting to the world. And make sure you include links. It might be to your business's website where they can learn more information about you and your bio, the sort of things you're working on. If you've got a blog, you might like to link to your blog, and you might link to any other resources that really help build that professional view of you. And very importantly, you need to check what your profile looks like as a user. So quite often when you're setting up your own profile and you're logged into the account, you actually are not seeing what the rest of the world would see. So you might like to get some of your friends to show you what your profile looks like to them, or you might like to log out of the account so you can actually see what the public view is. But don't rely on looking at what it looks like when you're logged into the system. Now, for some platforms, you'll need to get a username. Now, on things like LinkedIn, you will actually use your name, but on things like Twitter, you'll actually have some sort of handle. And you should think about what that would be. It obviously should be something that's suitable for work. So you don't want something that sounds too frivolous or a bit silly. It's actually sometimes a good idea to not put your company name in there. If you're, may change jobs in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, having the name of where you work now connected with your profile may not be the smartest move in the long run. Obviously, you can't always get your own name. If your name is, has a relatively unusual spelling or is not particularly common, or if you joined a long time ago, you may actually have been able to get your own name. So, for example, Ray Pointer has his actual name. You might like to think about whether your name is memorable. My Twitter name is 1Sue3. It's actually quite an easy thing to say to somebody and they can remember it. Think about whether it's relevant. If you're interested in talking about stats, as Annie Pettit is, Love Stats might be a great name. And also it should be appropriate. So if you're actually tweeting on behalf of your business, something like SMR might be a good name if that is indeed the name of where you're tweeting from. So you also need to think about what's your message. In the same way you would with any other communication, what is it that you're wanting to say on social media? What image are you projecting? Is your goal to show what your expertise is in a specialist area, or is it something else? Are you wanting to comment on industry news? It's really helpful when you're getting started if you've got some sort of idea of what is the message I'm sending. So for example, I'm always thinking about how can I tell people more about new research techniques. And so that really drives the sorts of things that I might share with people, the sort of things that I might be talking about. It's also a good idea, before you get too heavily into social media, to think about what your social media policy is. Now, I do mean your social media policy. Where you work may well have a social media policy, but in addition to thinking about that, think about what you want to say on social media. Would you just like to be talking about work and a business capacity, or do you want to include a little bit of your social life or some of your hobbies? And I think that's something that's worth thinking about in the early days. It sort of helps guide boundaries, so you're constantly developing your profile in a way that's meaningful to you and fits with the image that you want to project. So if we quickly have a look at some of the basics on Twitter, the things that you need to think about there are, when you're tweeting, you've only got 140 characters, which for some people, they find that really hard to keep their messages that short. So you might even like to practice crafting, good short messages. In Twitter, one of the easiest ways to get started is to retweet things that other people say that you're interested in. You can actually like other people's comments. That's changed recently. On Twitter, we used to favorite things. Now we like them. And you can also use it to send people direct messages. So if I'm connected to somebody else on Twitter, I can send them a private message that only both of us can see. So try and be social on Twitter. If you share some information you learnt from somebody else, give them credit. And you can do that by, at the end of your tweet, putting @tip and their Twitter name. So if you learnt something from me, you could write it in Twitter and then put HT@123 or via123. And that says to people, I learnt this, but I learnt this from Sue. And people like it when you're, kind of sharing on Twitter. Try and involve other people in the conversation. If you see something that you thought I might like, you could actually type @123, I thought you'd like this. Now, that little dot there is important. And it's one of kind of the Twitter rules that a lot of people who use Twitter don't really realize. If I had just typed in @123 there, the only people who would see that tweet are me and people who follow me, whereas with that dot there, it sends it out to a broader audience. In Twitter, you don't have friends. You follow people and people follow you. So that means we talk about relationships in Twitter being asymmetric. You don't have to actually be friends with everybody who's following you. So who would you like to follow when you first get going on Twitter? Start off with people you know, and then you'll start to see other people who tweet about things that you're interested in. Follow them. And there might be other reasons for following people. And you really don't need to worry about how many people are following you. Just enjoy it and get something out of it. It doesn't matter how many followers you've got. If you're enjoying Twitter and using it well, the followers will come. So when you're getting started, it's sometimes a bit daunting to think, what are you going to tweet about? And that's where having this social media policy and the idea of how you're going to communicate and what your message is, that helps you, think about what the content would be. But you can start slow, sit back, watch and learn. Start to retweet people. When you see things that are interesting, just retweet them. It's a really easy way to start getting involved. Make comments. Share links to other content that you find interesting. Hashtags. Hashtags are one of the reasons why it doesn't matter how many people follow you. Hashtags indicate what tweets are about, and you can use them to find and curate content. If you have a look at this tweet here, I've written, looking forward to the 2016 Festival of #NewMR in February, #MRX. #NewMR tells people that this tweet is about new market research, and it actually works as a name in this context. And then by putting #MRX at the end of the tweet, I'm saying to people, this tweet is relevant for people who are interested in market research. So once you're getting started, a few hashtags that will get you on your way. If you're interested in general market research, you use #MRX. If you're interested in some of the new stuff, and if you're here today, you almost certainly are, follow #NewMR. Many of the industry associations have hashtags. The Australian Market and Social Research Society people follow hash AMSRS. SMR people, you've got hash SMR, and many of the other associations, CASRO, APOR, all have hashtags, and it's fairly easy to find them on Twitter, and you can often guess what they will be. You might like to think what areas interest you. If you're interested in mobile, have a look for what the hashtag is there. If you're interested in social media or text analytics, it's usually quite easy to find what the hashtags are, and you can probably guess. And quite often, conferences will have hashtags. They may have a specific hashtag, or if they're run by associations, they may just use their regular hashtag. You can include links in your tweets. This would be a tweet telling people about a conference that's coming up, but you might be including links to, blog articles or other news articles that you've seen. You can add pictures to your tweets, which actually will give them a bit more impact. Here's a tweet about the Handbook of Mobile Market Research, and you can see if I'd not put a picture on that, you really wouldn't notice it as much as you do with the picture there. Obviously, the picture should be relevant, or it's a bit silly, and you may not want to put pictures on all of your tweets. So there are lots of market researchers who tweet. You might like to look out for people who you consider to be thought leaders, or people who interest you, or people who work in similar zones to you. You might like to follow companies, your company, your competitors, your clients. You'll probably want to follow some of the industry associations, and there's many, many other great information sources on Twitter. You might like to follow publishers, news sites, general reports. And another thing to keep in mind is most people who use Twitter a lot do not use the native Twitter client. They actually use some other third-party options. I personally use TweetDeck, and I love it. This is a few columns from TweetDeck from me this week, and you can see there I'm following hash MRX, where I'm picking up general market research information. Hash SMR, getting some tweets there from the SMR Qual conference earlier in the week, and I've got hash NewMR, and I can see what's happening there. Lots of other people use Hootsuite, and there may be some others that you would find useful. So to move on to LinkedIn, the basics with LinkedIn business profile. Think about it as your online CV. I would use it to connect with people you have a business relationship with or who you want to have a business relationship with. In Twitter, you can post updates, you can build your network, you can follow people who interest you, and again, you can send messages to people, as connections. And sometimes you might be able to connect with someone on LinkedIn and you may not have an email address for them. LinkedIn also has a groups feature, which we'll talk about in a little bit more, and more recently they've added a blogging function. So LinkedIn can be a great source of intelligence. You can see what people look like. You're going to meet somebody at a conference or in a meeting, you can look up beforehand and check out what they look like so you can spot them in the foyer. You can often see who's been looking at you, which might give you some clues for people who are interested in what you're up to. In terms of general industry awareness, you can see, when people are changing jobs and a whole lot of other things. The LinkedIn groups, there are lots and lots of groups that are relevant to market research. So have a look and find some that interest you. You can take part in discussions. You might start by just reading other people's discussions, and then you might like to contribute. After you get a bit more confident, post discussion topics in these groups. You can start your own group, but it is a lot of work, so I'd really think about whether, you've got a real reason to start a new group. So, Facebook. Lots of you will probably use Facebook for your personal life. You may not use it for work. One thing to remember is most researchers who use Facebook don't use it for work purposes. And those that do, they're really using it to broaden the definition of work. Whereas, you might be quite serious on LinkedIn and Twitter about, your work kind of presence and the things you're talking about. People tend to have a bit more fun on Facebook. Perhaps make some jokes about market research, share some fun content, play some games. So it tends to be a little bit more social. So if you're looking to add that dimension to your online personality, that might be of interest to you. keep in mind there are a few different ways you might use Facebook. You might say, this is my work-only Facebook account. You might say, I'm only being social on Facebook. I'll keep my work colleagues and contacts to my LinkedIn and my Twitter, and on Facebook with friends and family. That's fine. It's your choice, and it's good to sort of think about it before you start sort of mixing up your purposes. You can try multiple accounts, so you might have a work Facebook and a social Facebook. Obviously, that kind of doubles your workload, but it's good to think about those things before you get too far down the track. And obviously, there are lots of other platforms. Get these first 3 under your belt, and then start to have a look at which ones work for you. And there's going to be new and new platforms all the time, so keep an eye out for what's on the horizon. Using social media at a conference is a really great way to get more out of a conference, and it's a great way to build your brand. If you're live tweeting at a conference, people see that you're at the conference. You can blog at a conference. You might like to live blog. That's a lot of work and pretty hard. Or write a detailed and more considered blog later. If you're using social media at a conference, you can spot people who are there that you want to meet, and people who might like to meet you know you're there because they're seeing you tweeting from it. And then once you've been at a conference, when you meet new people, get back to your desk, and connect with them on LinkedIn with the business cards you've collected, and then you can put the business cards in the bin because you've made your connections and they're in your permanent network. And also remember, you don't need to be at a conference to get a benefit from social media. By following the Twitter stream, you can quite often see what the main themes of a conference are, who's there, what they're talking about, and if there's something that interests you, connect with the person, let them know you'd like to get a copy of their slides, you'd like to talk to them about your paper. You can really get a lot of value out of a conference that you've not even been able to attend. And finally, what are the social media factors? You really do need to put in the effort, unfortunately. There's no easy track to social media success. You have to be there day after day, taking part, participating. Be authentic. People don't like phony people in real life, and they don't like them on social media. Being positive is important on social media, particularly with really short tweets. It's really to be misinterpreted if you've got a negative view. If there is something you'd like to be, you feel like you need to criticize or critique, perhaps a blog post or a more considered longer length piece might be the better way to go. And finally, be interesting. Nobody wants to spend extra time on social media with boring people. And I'm sure there's some other social media success factors that you might like to suggest. So feel free to share them on Twitter. If you'd like to learn more, there are a couple of interesting books that I've enjoyed reading, and I'm sure you'll get some value out of them. And finally, thanks very much for listening today, and hopefully you might learn more by following me on Twitter at 1Sue3. And hopefully you might have some questions now, Ray.